pretty sure that I've not gotten to the point yet where people are going to start sending me lots of free products. But if some companies felt so inclined, as much as I would love camera gear, there's certain little products, local products, which I would happily accept and consume regularly on my channel. So they're better than you think, and that's assuming that you think they're really good. They're better than that. These are amazing. Yeah. Japanese style. Excuse me. I don't know why I was a Japanese girl instead of a Japanese guy. Oh, so, excuse me, son. Chip stuff in my teeth. Hold on a second here. Okay, chip stuff gone. Yes, good. This is a Fuji XH2S. Dramatic effect achieved. Secondary look at. I don't like calling things reviews when I don't have the products on my hand. You know, camera companies send out a bunch of, they're doing so many lately, like to these people that I've never ever seen before. I'm not going to get into that, but it's kind of weird, right? Like since the GH6 especially. These like backwoods people, I'm a backwoods person, but backwoods people that, oh, I don't know. I'm not going to say it. I checked lots of sites. I checked Fujifilm. I watched the entire X Summit. I checked a lot of YouTubers with pre-release copies of the XH2S to get a general feel for the real-world user experience as well as technical specs. The majority, though, I think of the technical specs beyond what is available on Fuji's own site and places like Adorama and B&H, I like to call them B&L, Wally, have indeed come from Gerald Undone. Gerald is almost always going above and beyond, digging deep into technical specs and performing his own tests to verify results. Many of the tests can be hard to follow, especially for those unfamiliar with camera technology, though I think he does a very good job of balancing things so that most can understand the results. So if, hopefully after watching my video, you still crave more technical detail, please check out the latest video on the Fuji XH2S that he's done. He has a pre-production unit which he will undoubtedly be doing further testing on and posting at least, I think, one more video on in the future soon. No pressure, Gerald. So that being said, here we go. The Fujifilm XH2S is the best APS-C mirrorless flagship hybrid camera to date, plain and simple. But in all fairness, it is in many regards the only APS-C mirrorless flagship today. So the question though has to be asked, where is Fujifilm's competition? I can tell you plain and simply, it's not from Canon at the moment, it's not from Sony. The R7 and the R10 really don't hold a candle to this. But rather than get too deep into that, please check out my recent video on the XH2S versus the forthcoming Nikon Z-mount flagship. After watching this video, well, maybe first watch this video, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up, then watch Gerald's video to be fair, then walk around for an hour or so, because it's never really a good idea to just sit down for more than an hour straight, then watch the XH2 versus video, and then check out Studio-Taku.com and buy the biggest, largest, most expensive print you can afford for a loved one, and maybe a couple smaller prints or large prints for your office, for your children's room, you know. Feel it, you know, what feels right for you. Shameless plugs aside, let's get deeper into this. The Fujifilm XH2S boasts a 26 megapixel X-Trans stacked sensor, boasting some pretty impressive speeds. Shutter speeds, not to be confused with photo capture speeds, are between 1/8,000th of a second and 900 seconds in both mechanical and electronic front curtain shutter, with speeds as high as 1/32,000th of a second in purely electronic shutter, with the same 900-second limit for long exposures, time lapses, etc. The slow shutter speeds are greatly reduced in program mode at only 4 seconds, and aperture priority mode with a max of 30 seconds in all 3 shutter modes. Oh, and it's 1/4 of a second, the longest shutter speed in movie mode, which to me seems like an unnecessary restriction, but it's much better than most cameras offer. The reason you'd want a longer one is for time lapses that you want to pull directly from videos, which is sometimes useful. Now, for actual photo capture speeds, all speeds I am about to read are basically up to, meaning in most cases you need a fast CF Express card that plays nice with the XH2S presumably. Particularly impressive, using the electronic shutter mode shooting at full resolution, you'll get RAW at 20 frames per second with 800 frames, which equates to 40-second bursts before the buffer needs to clear. At 30 frames per second, you'll get 180 frames for 6 seconds, and at 40 frames per second, 140 frames for 3.5 seconds, or in JPEG, 40 frames per second and 184 frames. Now that's the only spec I'm going to give in electronic or mechanical shutter modes for JPEG, simply because JPEG does not exceed that 40 frames per second limit of RAW, and all frame rates that fall below 40 frames per second for JPEG are listed as unlimited frames, meaning you will not fill the buffer. Enough said, right? For RAW images, mechanical shutter capture speed is still very good, but not quite the stellar speed I think some of us were hoping for, though the buffer speed is very impressive. In mechanical shutter mode, and remember, this is all raw specs, you get 15 frames per second with 1000 frames for 66.5 seconds before filling the buffer. And choosing either 10 or 8 frames per second, you will get unlimited frames. Which, when you think about it, it means that 15 frames per second is virtually unlimited, because I don't know anyone that holds the shutter button for 66.5 seconds continuously. So as long as you keep your burst to 10 or maybe 20 seconds, which is still pretty ridiculous in all but the most extreme shooting scenarios, I think that as long as you wait a second or two before starting to shoot again, you'll still get another 10 to 20 second burst. The buffer's probably not going to fill up. The buffer should clear and be ready for another 10 to 20 second burst. Switching over to some of the physical aspects of the camera for a moment, it's very nice to see a full-size HDMI port and doors instead of flaps for all of the ports. One SD slot and CF Express is good, but I am of the mindset that we should probably just switch to dual CF Expresses on anything that gives us dual card slots at this point, regardless of how you feel about a $2,500 price tag. Adding a second CF Express card for a couple $100 more should be in your budget if you're buying a camera at this price point. So I really am talking about flagships, just to be clear. Actually though, to be honest, my true mindset is that it's time to bring on full-size NVMe drives, I would say with a fan on each side of the camera blowing in the same direction, which would help cool the sensor and the processor all at once in an efficient, sensible wind tunnel function type fashion. Wind tunnel fashion. So I've often been accused of sort of being ahead of my time, or you may say that I'm a dreamer, haha. But, you know, Confinity has done it now with dual NVMEs on their camera, and I thought, honestly, that was at least 5 years away. I'd mentioned it in about maybe a year or 6 months ago in a video of mine that I thought NVMe full-size drives should be coming, and I was really surprised to see on Confinity, which makes me think that maybe my future set dreams are, you know, maybe the future is catching up with my dreams, so to speak, and yeah, that'd be nice. So the XH2 is said to have a deeper grip than the XH1, which is also a welcome improvement. It has wheels and buttons versus a bunch of top dials, which some will not like. My 2 cents on this, I have an Olympus OM10 film camera with dials. I like it because it's kind of like therapy using it. But for high-speed shooting and ease of use, I prefer the modern design that most companies actually adopted decades ago on film cameras, and particularly on flagships. Look at the Nikon F5 if you want a very nice flagship example, which is basically a film version of the Z9 in most aesthetics. I think Fujifilm knows, however, that dial-loving The dial-loving audience is a large demographic for them, and I think lovers of dials can expect to see them remain on the XT line and some other lines as well. I also suspect we are going to see some significant firmware updates coming to the XT4 relatively shortly after the release of the XH2 or XH2S, as it seems a theme lately with camera companies bringing new discoveries from new releases over to the past releases, whether openly or on the sly. Some of this may have to do with a dwindling supply chain, and rather than overproduce cameras during this supply and demand shortage, they can improve the cameras they already have out to keep the consumer happy. We actually saw this at the start of lockdown with several companies, and I think this is a silver lining of the current situation. As hyper-release cycles were kind of getting, honestly, nauseating to me personally. I'm a fan of technology, but I'm more a fan of technology that is made to last. Cameras should reach a point soon where upgrading is not really necessary for a decade or more, maybe a century. I mean, when you think about it, we already are kind of there. Who really needs more than 4K 120, maybe 4K 240, and 40 frames per second photos? I've talked kind of about this end stage technology, as I've called it, in the past, and I will talk about it more in the future, as I feel it is key to steering away from the race to the bottom economics that currently dictate the quality of life for many on this planet. And that's no joke, but this is an XH2S talk. So the XH2S has a fully articulating screen. This is good. USB-C 3.2 Generation 2 support is there. It has live powering, but as far as I can see, there is no ability to output to a USB-C hard drive for recording. Something I was really hoping to see on this camera. Why is this not becoming standard? Sigma introduced it 4 years ago, allowing RAW to be recorded to much cheaper and versatile hard drives externally without the need for a bulky monitor. Other than short-sightedness, the only thing I can imagine is it's to protect Sony card sales, and possibly it is something most camera companies agreed to in a closed-door meeting. No, not gonna do that. This is too long already.
It's all right. I'm not really feeling it either.
The camera has 5-axis Ibis claiming 7 stops of compensation, which sounds very impressive, and I'm sure it's pretty good. However, Gerald Undone and others have basically said the stabilization feels a bit unimpressive, and when it's turned on, the difference is not that drastic, especially compared to other cameras. So let's hope to see some improvements here via firmware, as everyone is currently on pre-production units, so there could be some updates that make it a lot better, hopefully. There is additional stabilization in digital mode, which creates an additional crop and only works up to 60 frames per second. I'm curious to see how well that does in the real world though. With the XH2S able to do 120 calculations per second, AF is said to be improved as well, but reports thus far are mixed. I think it is better, but I think that, again, firmware is probably going to dial that in, as it has in the past with other Fujifilm cameras. Moving to video, clearly there's a lot of improvements here. 6.2K video capability using the entire 6240 by 4160 sensor size, aspect ratio of 16.9 UHD, 17.9 DCI, 6.2K 24 to 30 frames per second is just amazing. Oversampled 4K 60 with no crop, making it equal to the quality of the camera's 24p footage, which is rarely the case from competitors. It's usually line skipped or something like that. 4K 120 has no audio since it is created in high speed mode and saved as a slow down file. That's okay with me. There is 1.29 crop, but it's still oversampled from still larger than 4K sensor area. So not the complete sensor, but we have uncropped oversampled 1080p from 24 to 120 frames per second, and 4K from 24 to 60 frames per second, and 1080p 240 frames per second with a 1.38 times crop. The Fujifilm XH2S boasts a very low rolling shutter effect with readout speeds as high as 1 to 180th of a second, which is very good. It has internal ProRes H.265, all Intra 422, which from Gerald undone sounds like it's surprisingly hard to play back even on high-end machines. So he recommends using ProRes. It's not that much higher bit rates, and it's going to be smoother on pretty much any editing machine. So Gerald, being Gerald, did some very impressive tests on dynamic range with his Xyla chart. But without going into it as much detail as he did, I was going to list all these, but this is where I'd say just go watch his video. The bottom line is, though, the dynamic range is very real. I know I sort of scoffed at it in my my post-Fuji Summit video, but the results really are real, and 14 stops of dynamic range is possible plus. So yeah. So I would really say just watch Gerald's video, because I did take notes and I was going to list that all off right now. But honestly, he does it better than I could. And I felt like I try to condense it, and in doing so, I don't think it's the way to do it. It's too much information with not enough details, if that makes sense. So I'm watching it go away now. How much of this will I keep in here? So one point that's worth mentioning, Gerald doesn't recommend in-camera noise reduction due to ghosting effects, and also mentioned the F-Log2 particularly creates blurry LCD and viewfinder views. And this is, I think, confirmed in other videos where people with pre-production units were confused by the sometimes blurry image they were seeing in the camera. So I think Gerald hit the nail on the head, so to speak. 6K open gate F-Log2 downsampled to 4K achieves, oh, this is the stuff, 11.6 and 14.7. Anyways, yeah, seriously, super high dynamic range. I'm not reading these. I'm sorry. I thought we were done with that. While that rolls down, I'm going to enjoy a refreshing snack. Man. Oh, God. Hardest thing about doing this video is watching these and not eating them. Okay, I missed something. The bottom line is the maximum dynamic range results Gerald was seeing was about 14.6 stops of dynamic range. Gerald was rightfully blown away by these results. This, more than any other factor, has me considering the XH2S, something I didn't think was going to really happen. Maybe as a second camera, or maybe I'll go away from Nikon for the summer and come back later. The camera does have dual ISO, which is F-Log dependent. In F-Log 1, the base ISO is 640 or 1600. In F-Log 2, it's 1250 and 3200, so double in each mode. ISO noise is good up to 6400 with good color retention up to 12,800. Which to me, color retention is more important than noise. I don't mind noise so much. We'll see how that looks though. So there's a lot of other things to talk about in this camera, but I think due to time constraints, I'm going to do a separate video in the future, just maybe with the camera in hand. Gerald, I'm sorry for likely badly quoting you at times. I'm currently working on 3 videos other than this and just trying to get this finished. I've had a difficult week. But what I wanted to mention one more thing that you said, Gerald, which really stuck out to me, and that was in regards to the near overabundance of settings. And I particularly agree with you with the point you made here in regard to the bit rates. So 50 megabits per second in 4K, let alone 4K 60p being an option in Fujifilm's menus is Fujifilm asking for trouble, in my opinion, with inferior footage being put out there and some confusion / disappointment with some customers. So they're going to be wondering kind of why their footage doesn't look so great, and you said it better and got way more into the details. So rather than hashing up your sentiment even more, I'll remind people, please check out Gerald's review titled Fujifilm XH2S, a very nerdy review and technical guide. It's worth the watch, as are pretty much any of Gerald's videos. So the one thing I will add there, this is not scripted, I'm off script for a second here. The 240 frames per second, I was really impressed to see that that allows to go up to 700 megabits per second. And I think that is another key that has me greatly considering the Fuji XH2S, because with my Nikon Z6 and even the Z9, which I've been considering purchasing, two of the biggest caveats are the lack of 240 frames per second. And it's kind of funny because if you watch my still, I think to date, most popular video is a Yi M1, super cheap Chinese micro four thirds camera. I was just fumbling around with it and I completely forgot. That thing has 240p. And granted, it's in like 480, super old resolution, but it has it. It has it. The Z9 has 8K 60 frames per second raw capability, but somehow they can't squeeze in 1080, 240. I mean, come on, Nikon. It's ridiculous. So the Fuji, though, I watch a lot of Gerald Undone. I watch a lot of Camera Conspiracy. A nice little balance there. And, Casey from Camera Conspiracies uses the 240p a lot for, in the past his street crossings, but more lately for his nature photography, birds particularly. And, it's something that, as he says, is great to have that option. But I will say with X-T4, you do see like little jaggies and little, whatever you call it, anti-aliasing and moire. I always forget those words. I don't care, but I do. I care about the results. I don't care about the words. But the bottom line is like, that's kind of why I never really considered the X-T4, was that reason specifically. And something that I know from experience with using a GH2 as my first camera. I bought that camera like a week before it got hacked, and the bit rates went up through the roof, like 10 times what it was factory. And before the hack, that's the results of everything, 1080p or whatever. As soon as you see a fence or something, you see that unpleasantness, we'll call it, so I don't stumble over the words again. And that's the same sort of thing that I've been seeing with X-T4 sometimes, depending on the lighting, depending on the detail level. So giving the 700 megabits per second in 240 that Fuji has now done with the XH2S, that should, in my opinion, just nullify it. That should be problem solved. And I think, Casey, if you're watching this, I think you're really going to like the 240 out of the XH2S. God, these names. They're just getting too long and complex. But yeah, I think it should be very, very good, unless Fuji somehow just botched it. But with that amount of bit rate, should be very, very good. And again, I'm very tempted to get that camera. So back to script. All right, I'm gonna cut it right about there. I think Fujifilm will stand on top of the hill until Nikon releases their APS-C flagship. Hopefully Nikon catches on that the higher frame rates is something that a lot of us really do want, particularly the bird photographers like me and Casey, who see advantages of doing some video clips to complement their photography in super slow motion. Casey, I know you're more videography oriented, though I do see you going towards photos. But yeah, on YouTube, having super slow motion can be very useful. 120p is decent, but at 240 frames per second, there's just so much more we can see in certain scenarios, just things we can do with exploding water, holy powder, all kinds of stuff. And it's also a lot more forgiving in regards to unsteady hands. But anyways, it's going to be a very interesting year for APS-C, and we'll just have to wait and see, I think. So thank you for watching Film Studio Taku. I very much appreciate it. Please do subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. directly to video, what is clearly improved is the camera's video of either 16.9 UHD, 17.9 DCI, some other stuff. My screen is going too fast, damn it.